The sun hung low over Dusty Creek, painting the desert mountains in shades of purple and amber. Red dust coated everything in this frontier town: the wooden sidewalks, the weathered storefronts. Even the air itself seemed thick with it. Eleanor Whitfield stood at her bedroom window, watching tumbleweeds roll down Main Street like ghosts of the past, driven by the eternal desert wind. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling its coolness against her skin. The large wooden house her father had built stood like a monument to prosperity in this harsh land, its white paint fighting a losing battle against the relentless dust. As the only daughter of Harrison Whitfield, owner of Dusty Creek's First National Bank, Eleanor lived in what most would consider luxury. Yet the fine lace curtains and imported furniture felt more like prison bars than comforts. "Eleanor, dear," her mother called from downstairs, her voice thin and proper. "Your father expects you at dinner promptly." Eleanor didn't answer. Her gaze had caught on a figure moving through the dusty street below, a young man leading a tired horse toward the livery stable. Even from this distance, she could see the weariness in his shoulders, the way his worn boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. He was new to town, she realized. In a place like Dusty Creek, strangers stood out like wildflowers in the desert. The next morning brought the usual ritual. Eleanor helped her mother with correspondence, practiced piano in the stuffy parlor, and endured another lecture from her father about maintaining their family's reputation. But her mind kept drifting to the stranger she'd seen. It wasn't until afternoon, when she convinced her mother she needed fabric from the general store, that she managed to escape the house. The heat hit her like a physical force as she stepped outside. The parasol her mother insisted she carry did little against the brutal sun. As she made her way down Main Street, nodding politely to the townspeople who tipped their hats, she heard the rhythmic sound of a pitchfork moving through hay, behind the livery stable. She found him. The stranger was mucking out stalls, his shirt soaked with sweat, muscles moving beneath the thin fabric as he worked. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her 19 years. His hair was dark, bleached lighter at the tips by the sun, and when he turned at her approach, she saw eyes the color of storm clouds. "Ma'am," he said, straightening and touching the brim of his battered hat. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, not quite Southern, not quite Western. "I'm not a ma'am," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. "I'm Eleanor." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Then I'm Luke. Miss Luke Cassidy, just hired on to help with the horses." "You're new to Dusty Creek. Rode in yesterday from Colorado way." "Been drifting since—" He paused, something dark passing across his features. "Well, been drifting a while." Eleanor knew she should leave. A banker's daughter had no business talking to a stable hand. But something about his direct gaze, the honest dirt under his fingernails, the way he didn't fawn over her like the merchant's sons did, made her linger. "It's hard country out here," she said. "Most drifters don't stay long. Most places don't give them reason to." He leaned on his pitchfork, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "You don't look like someone who spends much time in stables." "My father owns the bank," she admitted, watching his expression carefully for the usual change, the sudden deference or calculated interest. But Luke just nodded, as if she'd told him the weather. "That explains the fancy dress. Must be hot as blazes under all those layers." Eleanor laughed, surprising herself. "It is. Sometimes I think I'd trade all the silk in the world for a pair of men's trousers and the freedom to ride wherever I pleased." "Nothing stopping you but yourself," Luke said, then seemed to catch himself. "Pardon me, that was forward." "No," Eleanor said quickly. "It was honest. People aren't often honest with me." They talked while he worked. Eleanor perched on a hay bale despite what it would do to her dress. She learned he'd been orphaned young, had worked cattle drives and railroad camps, had seen mountains that touched the sky and deserts that stretched forever. In return, she told him about the suffocating expectations, The endless social calls, the future already mapped out for her like a survey plot. The sun was setting when she realized how long she'd been gone. "I have to go," she said, jumping up and brushing hay from her skirts. "My father will be furious." "Eleanor," Luke called as she turned to leave. She looked back to find him standing closer than propriety allowed, close enough that she could see the dust in his eyelashes, smell the honest scent of work and leather and something uniquely him. "Will I see you again?" She should have said no, should have remembered who she was, who he was, the impossible gulf between them. Instead, she whispered, "Tomorrow night, after the moon rises, behind the grain warehouse." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and whispered conversations. Eleanor would slip out after her parents retired, her heart hammering as she made her way through the sleeping town. Luke would be waiting, sometimes with his guitar, filling the quiet desert night with melodies that spoke of loneliness and longing. They talked about everything and nothing. He taught her to identify constellations she'd never noticed despite living under the same sky all her life. She told him about the books she'd read, the places she dreamed of seeing. They were careful never to touch, maintaining a proper distance even as something electric hummed between them. "You're playing with fire," Luke told her one night as they sat on empty grain sacks, watching the moon paint the desert silver. "Your father finds out. He'll run me out of town, or worse." "Then we'll be careful," Eleanor said, though she knew he was right. Harrison Whitfield was not a forgiving man, and his daughter's reputation was part of his business capital. "I've been run out of towns before," Luke continued, his voice soft. "But this time would be different." "Why?" The word came out breathless. He turned to look at her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest tight. "You know why?" The night of the summer dance. Eleanor stood before her mirror in a blue silk gown that cost more than Luke would earn in a year. Her mother fussed with her hair while her father lectured about the eligible young men who would be attending, particularly James Morrison, the railroad executive's son. She danced with James, smiled at his pompous stories, let him fetch her punch, but her eyes kept finding Luke, who was helping tend the horses outside. Their gazes would meet through the window, and each time felt like touching a live wire. Near midnight, she claimed a headache and stepped out for air. She found Luke by the water trough, cooling his face in the tepid water. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without looking up. "Neither should you. The dance help is supposed to stay by the carriages. I needed a minute." He straightened, water dripping from his chin. In the moonlight, he looked like something wild, something that belonged to the desert and sky rather than the confines of civilization. "You look beautiful, like something from another world." "I hate it," Eleanor said fiercely. "The dress, the dance, all of it. I feel like I'm suffocating." "Eleanor, I wish I could just ride away. Like you do, just pick a direction and go." "No, you don't." His voice was rough. "You don't know what it's like. Having nothing, nobody, no home to go back to." "I have a home and I'm still nobody," she shot back. "Just a banker's daughter, a pretty ornament to be sold to the highest bidder." They stood facing each other, the desert wind whipping Eleanor's silk skirts. Then Luke stepped closer, raising one work-roughened hand to her cheek. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes. "Eleanor," he whispered. "We can't." "I know." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "But I'm tired of can't." He kissed her then. There in the shadows behind the grain warehouse, with the music of the dance drifting on the wind. It was gentle and desperate all at once, tasting of impossibility and desire. Eleanor's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "This can't end well. I don't care about the ending," Eleanor whispered. "Just this, just now." "But endings come whether we care about them or not." Her father was waiting when she returned to the dance, his face carved from stone. Someone had seen them. Of course someone had seen them. In a town like Dusty Creek, Secrets had a way of sprouting legs. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Within an hour, Luke was facing Harrison Whitfield and 3 armed men in the livery stable. Eleanor watched from her window, her mother's arms around her like shackles. As her father gave Luke until sunrise to leave town, "You come back," Harrison said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "And I'll see you hang for stealing from the bank. Don't think I can't make the charges stick." Luke's eyes found Eleanor's window. Even from the distance, she could see him memorizing her face. Then he packed his few belongings, saddled his horse, and rode out into the darkness. Eleanor pressed her hand to the window, feeling the cool glass against her palm just as she had that first day. But this time, the ache in her chest was sharp enough to cut. In the distance, she could barely make out Luke's silhouette against the star-filled sky, growing smaller and smaller until the desert swallowed him whole. The banker's daughter knew one secret kiss, and it would haunt her through all the long years to come. 5 years had passed since that night, and Dusty Creek had grown harder, meaner. The drought came first, 3 years of cloudless skies that turned the surrounding ranches to dust. Then the railroad changed its route, taking the cattle market with it. Finally, the silver mine up in the hills played out, leaving behind empty shafts and emptier promises. Eleanor stood in her father's office at the First National Bank, studying the ledgers that told the story of a dying town. The numbers swam before her tired eyes. Foreclosures, defaulted loans, businesses closing their doors. Outside the window, Main Street looked like a mouth missing teeth, with boarded-up storefronts between the few establishments still struggling to survive. "We need to call in the Morrison loan," she said, not looking up from the books. "Eleanor, please." Her mother's voice came from the doorway, fragile as old paper. Martha Whitfield had aged a decade in the past 2 years, since the pneumonia that took Harrison had also stolen her vitality. "The Morrisons have been our friends for—" "The Morrisons left for California 6 months ago. Mother." Eleanor's voice was steady, businesslike. She'd learned to keep emotion out of it. "Along with half the town, we either collect what we can or close our doors too." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once dreamed of escape, and now she was trapped more thoroughly than ever. Her father's sudden death had left them with a bank on the verge of collapse and no male heir to take over. The law might frown on a woman running a bank, but desperation had a way of bending rules. The town needed the bank to survive, and the bank needed someone who understood numbers better than pride. Eleanor had become that someone. She wore severe black dresses now, pulled her hair back in a tight bun, and learned to meet the eyes of men who would rather deal with anyone else. She'd foreclosed on families she'd known all her life, watched them pack their wagons and head for somewhere, anywhere else. Each signature on a foreclosure notice felt like a small death, but the alternative was watching the whole town blow away like tumbleweed. The afternoon sun beat through the windows, merciless as a judge. Eleanor shed her jacket, propriety be damned, and rolled up her sleeves. The white shirt underneath was damp with sweat. The bank's ceiling fans had stopped working months ago, and there was no money to fix them. "Mrs. Patterson is here." Her clerk, Timothy Hawkins, announced from the doorway. He was one of the few employees left, a nervous young man who jumped at shadows. Everyone jumped at shadows these days, with the stories coming out of the territories. Eleanor met with Mrs. Patterson, explained why the bank couldn't extend her loan again, watched the woman's face crumble like old adobe. She offered what she could: information about work in Albuquerque, a letter of recommendation. But they both knew it wasn't enough. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, Eleanor finally allowed herself a moment of weakness. She stood at the window where she'd once watched for strangers, pressing her palm against the glass in an old habit. The street outside was nearly empty, just old Samuel making his rounds to light the few remaining street lamps. "Miss Whitfield?" Timothy stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'll be going now, if that's all right. Wife's expecting me." "Of course. Timothy, give my regards to Sarah." Alone in the bank. Eleanor continued working by lamplight. The building creaked around her, settling into itself like old bones. She'd grown used to the solitude, even preferred it. No one to see when her mask slipped, when the weight of carrying the town's survival pressed too heavy on her shoulders. The rumors had started 6 months ago. Whispers of a gang operating out of Black Mesa, hitting banks and trains across the territory. The Patterson Gang, some called them, though others whispered the name Black Mesa Devils. They were smart, brutal, and growing bolder. Last month, they'd hit a bank in Silver City, left 3 men dead and the town's savings gone like smoke. Eleanor had quietly purchased a Colt .45 and learned to use it, practicing behind the bank in the early morning hours when no one would see. She kept it in the drawer beside the cash, cleaned and loaded. If the Black Mesa Gang came to Dusty Creek, they'd find at least one person ready to fight for what little remained. A dust devil whirled down Main Street, rattling windows and doors. Eleanor watched it pass, remembering another night when the wind had carried music and promises. She'd heard nothing of Luke Cassidy in 5 years, for all she knew. He was dead, or married with children, or still drifting from town to town. Sometimes she wondered if he ever thought of her, if he remembered that stolen kiss in the moonlight. She shook off the thought. That girl, the one who dreamed of freedom and romance, was as dead as her father. What remained was Eleanor Whitfield, banker and survivor, keeper of a dying town's last hope. The next morning brought a sandstorm out of the north, turning the sky yellow-brown and driving everyone indoors. Eleanor arrived at the bank early despite the weather, her face wrapped in a scarf, grit crunching between her teeth. She found Timothy already there, pale and trembling. "They hit Cutter's Ridge," he said without preamble. "The telegraph just came through. The Black Mesa Gang killed the bank president and 2 tellers, took everything." Cutter's Ridge was only 40 miles south. Eleanor felt her stomach drop, but kept her voice steady. "How many riders?" 8, maybe 10, led by someone called Bart Patterson. They say he enjoys the killing more than the money." Eleanor moved to the safe, checking the pantry contents. Barely enough to cover the week's withdrawals. Certainly not enough to tempt a gang that had been hitting larger targets. But desperate men did desperate things, and Dusty Creek was isolated enough to make an easy target. "We need to organize a town meeting," she said. "Tonight. Whoever's left needs to know what's coming." The meeting was sparsely attended. Maybe 30 souls gathered in the church, faces gaunt with worry and worn by hardship. Eleanor stood at the pulpit, feeling the weight of their expectations. Sheriff Morrison was long gone, fled to California with his family. They had no law, no protection except what they could provide themselves. "We have 3 choices," Eleanor said, her voice carrying in the still air. "We can pack up what's left and run. We can hire guns to protect us, though I doubt we could afford many. Or we can prepare to defend ourselves." "With what?" Jacob Mueller, the blacksmith, called out. "Half the men are gone. We got farmers and shopkeepers, not gunfighters." "Then we become gunfighters," Eleanor replied, "or we die as victims. Those are the only choices left." The debate raged for hours, fear and pride warring in equal measure. In the end, they agreed to post watches, to gather what weapons they had, to prepare as best they could. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eleanor walked home through the dusty streets, the revolver heavy in her coat pocket. The big house felt emptier than ever. Her mother already retired to her room with her laudanum and memories. Eleanor sat in her father's study, now her own, and tried not to think about how young she felt, how unprepared for the weight she carried. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The desert was taking back the land, inch by inch. Soon, perhaps, Dusty Creek would be nothing but another ghost town, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. But not yet, not while Eleanor drew breath. She cleaned the Colt carefully, loaded each chamber, and set it beside her bed. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, she would allow herself one moment of remembrance. A young woman in silk, a drifter with storm cloud eyes, and a kiss that tasted of impossibility. The banker's daughter had grown hard as the desert that shaped her. But somewhere deep inside, that secret kiss still burned like an ember in the ashes, waiting, perhaps, for the wind to fan it back to flame. The rider appeared at the edge of town just as the sun broke over the eastern mountains, a dark silhouette against the burning sky. Old Samuel, keeping watch from the church tower, rang the bell 3 times, the signal for a stranger approaching. By the time the rider reached Main Street, half the remaining population had gathered, weapons visible but not raised. Eleanor stood on the bank steps, one hand resting on the Colt at her hip. The morning light was harsh, revealing every line that worry had carved into her face over the past 5 years. She squinted against the glare, trying to make out details of the approaching figure. The horse was a dusty bay, well-traveled but well cared for. The rider sat easy in the saddle, the kind of natural seat that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. He wore dark clothes, a long duster coat despite the heat, and a hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, Eleanor noticed the way he kept his right hand free, ready to reach for the gun she could see outlined beneath his coat. Then he lifted his head, and Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. The face was older, weathered by sun and wind and harder living. A scar now ran from his left temple to his jaw, white against sun-darkened skin. The boyish softness was gone, replaced by sharp angles and coiled readiness. But the eyes, those storm cloud eyes, were exactly as she remembered. Luke Cassidy had returned to Dusty Creek. He reined in his horse in the middle of the street, his gaze sweeping over the gathered townspeople before settling on Eleanor. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at seeing her dressed in severe black instead of silk, at the gun on her hip, at the authority in her stance. "I heard you might need some help," he said, his voice rougher than memory, like he'd been drinking desert sand. Jacob Muller stepped forward, rifle raised. "We don't need no drifters here. Stranger, best you move along." Luke's eyes never left Eleanor's. "I'm no stranger to Dusty Creek, though I understand why you might not remember me. Name's Luke Cassidy. I worked the stables here, 5 years back." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some remembered the scandal, the banker's daughter and the stable hand, the midnight flight. Others only knew the stories, grown larger in the telling. "That was a long time ago," Eleanor said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. "Why come back now?" "Heard about your trouble with the Black Mesa gang." Luke shifted in his saddle, and Eleanor noticed how he favored his left side slightly. "Thought you might could use someone who knows how they operate." "And you know them?" Timothy Hawkins called out, suspicion clear in his voice. Luke's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've had dealings with Bart Patterson and his boys, the kind that left me with this." He touched the scar on his face. "And them short 3 men. They'll be coming for your bank. Sure enough. Question is whether you want to face them alone or with someone who knows their tricks." Eleanor felt the crowd's eyes on her, waiting for her decision. As the de facto leader since her father's death, her word carried weight. She studied Luke's face, searching for the boy she'd known in the hard man before her. The years had changed him, carved away softness and left something dangerous in its place. But when their eyes met, she saw a flicker of something that made her chest tight. "Can you prove what you're saying?" she asked. Luke reached slowly into his saddlebag, careful not to spook the armed townspeople. He pulled out a wanted poster, unfolded it, and held it up. His own face stared back at them, younger, unscarred, but unmistakably him. "Luke Cassidy," it read. "Wanted for murder of 3 members of the Black Mesa gang. $500 reward." "You're a wanted man," Muller said, though his rifle had lowered slightly. "In certain circles," Luke agreed. "But last I checked, killing outlaws in self-defense wasn't a hanging offense, not in towns that still believe in justice." Eleanor made her decision. "Mr. Muller, Mr. Hawkins, lower your weapons. Mr. Cassidy, step down and we'll discuss your proposal. The rest of you, back to your posts. If the Black Mesa gang is coming, standing around gawking won't stop them." The crowd dispersed slowly, whispers following in their wake. Eleanor turned and walked into the bank without looking back, trusting Luke to follow. She heard his boots on the wooden sidewalk, the jingle of spurs that sounded like memory. Inside the bank, she moved behind her father's desk, her desk now, and gestured for him to sit. He remained standing, hat in hand, and for a moment she saw a flash of the young man who'd mucked stables and dreamed of mountains. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years, he agreed. You've changed. So have you. She gestured at his scar, the hard set of his shoulders. What happened? Luke? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the hat in his hands. After I left here, I hired on with a cattle drive heading to Montana. Good work, honest pay. We were 3 days out of Cheyenne when the Black Mesa gang hit us. Killed half the crew, took the payroll. I survived, but barely. He touched his scar again. An unconscious gesture. Spent 2 months healing up, another 6 tracking them down. Found 3 of them in a saloon in Colorado. They drew first. And now you hunt them. No. His eyes met hers, intense and direct. I've been working protection for freight companies, riding shotgun for payroll deliveries, trying to stop them from doing to others what they did to my crew. But when I heard they were heading this way, that Dusty Creek was likely their next target, he shrugged. Seemed like it was time to come back. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying him. The town can't afford to hire you. We can barely keep our doors open. I'm not looking for pay. Then what are you looking for? The question hung between them, loaded with 5 years of absence and a kiss that still burned in memory. Luke set his hat on the desk, ran a hand through his dark hair. Maybe I'm looking for redemption, he said finally. Maybe I'm just tired of running? Or maybe... He paused, his gaze holding hers. Maybe I never forgot a promise to claim every breath, even if it took me 5 years to find the courage to try. Eleanor's composure, so carefully maintained, cracked slightly. That was a different life. We were different people. Were we? Luke leaned forward, hands braced on the desk. You're still fighting for this town, still standing up to impossible odds, and I'm still just a drifter looking for a place to belong. Some things don't change. Eleanor. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, Dusty Creek baked under the merciless sun, dying by degrees. Everything's changed. My father's dead. My mother's fading. The town's half ghost already. And I'm... She paused, searching for words. I'm not that girl who believed in moonlight and promises. Good, Luke said. And she turned in surprise. He was standing now, moving closer with that dangerous grace. Because I'm not that boy who thought leaving was noble? We've both been forged in harder fires. Question is, are we strong enough now for what we couldn't handle then? Before Eleanor could answer, the bank door burst open. Timothy Hawkins stumbled in, face flushed with exertion and fear. Riders coming, he gasped. 8 of them, from the south, moving fast. Eleanor's hand went to her gun. How long? Maybe an hour, if they keep that pace. She looked at Luke, saw her own readiness reflected in his eyes. Well, Mr. Cassidy, seems you arrived just in time to prove your worth. Can you help us? His smile was fierce and wild, nothing like the gentle boy she'd known. I've been waiting 5 years for this chance. Eleanor, I'm not running this time. As they moved to prepare the town's defenses, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. The embers she'd thought dead flared to life, fed by the oxygen of his presence. It was dangerous, this feeling, more dangerous perhaps than the outlaws bearing down on them. But as Luke checked his weapons with practiced efficiency, as he outlined defensive positions with the tactical mind of someone who'd survived too many fights, Eleanor realized she didn't care about the danger. The drifter had returned, scarred and changed, but still carrying that storm in his eyes. And whatever came next, blood or redemption, death or a new beginning, at least she wouldn't face it alone. The attack came with the noon sun high and merciless, when shadows were short and there was nowhere to hide. The Black Mesa gang rode in fast and hard, dust billowing behind them like the wake of a ship from hell. They came down Main Street with guns already drawn, whooping and hollering like demons. Luke was positioned on the roof of the general store, rifle steady against his shoulder. His first shot took the lead rider's hat clean off, a warning that went unheeded. The rider, a thick-set man with a black beard, raised his pistol toward the bank. Luke's second shot didn't miss. The street erupted in gunfire, windows shattered, wood splintered, and the air filled with smoke and screams. Eleanor crouched behind the bank's heavy oak counter, her Colt ready. Through the broken window, she could see the outlaws scattering, seeking cover while returning fire. "The bank!" one of them shouted. "Patterson wants the bank!" 3 riders dismounted and rushed toward the building. Eleanor rose, aimed, and fired. Her shot caught one in the shoulder, spinning him around. Beside her, Timothy Hawkins fumbled with his shotgun, hands shaking so badly he couldn't load it properly. "Deep breaths. Timothy," she said, surprising herself with her calm. "Just like we practiced." The bank door exploded inward. 2 outlaws burst through, guns blazing. Eleanor dove left as bullets chewed into the desk where she'd been standing. She fired twice more, saw one man clutch his leg and go down. Timothy finally got his shotgun loaded and let loose both barrels. The second outlaw flew backward through the doorway. Outside, the battle raged. Luke had abandoned his roof position, was now in the street with a pistol in each hand. Eleanor watched through the shattered window as he moved with deadly precision, using overturned wagons and water troughs for cover. Each shot he fired found its mark. Jacob Muller was holding the livery stable with 2 other townsmen, their rifles keeping the outlaws from flanking the bank. Old Samuel, of all people, had taken position in the church tower with an ancient buffalo rifle, the boom of it punctuating the smaller arms fire. But the outlaws were experienced, brutal. They regrouped quickly, laying down covering fire while others moved to better positions. Eleanor saw one throw a torch through the window of Henderson's abandoned store. Smoke began to rise, black and choking. "They're trying to burn us out!" Timothy yelled. Eleanor made a decision. "Stay here. Guard the safe." She burst out the bank's side door into the alley, nearly colliding with an outlaw coming the other way. They faced each other for a frozen moment, both surprised. He was young, maybe 20, with scared eyes above a dirty bandana. His gun started to rise. Eleanor shot him twice in the chest. He fell backward, his gun clattering away. She stepped over his body, trying not to think about how young he looked, how his eyes had been more frightened than fierce. The alley led to Main Street. She pressed against the wall, peering around the corner. Luke was pinned down behind an overturned wagon, 3 outlaws advancing on his position. Without thinking, Eleanor stepped into the street and fired. Her shots drove the outlaws to cover, gave Luke the seconds he needed. He rolled right, came up firing, dropped one man and wounded another. His eyes found Eleanor's across the chaos, and something passed between them. Gratitude, fear, something deeper. "Eleanor, get back!" he shouted. But she was already moving, running low across the street as bullets whined past. She dove behind a horse trough as wood splinters exploded around her. Her dress tore, her carefully pinned hair came loose, streaming around her shoulders. A rider thundered past, leaning low to shoot. His bullet grazed her arm, leaving a line of fire. She gasped, but kept her gun steady, fired at his retreating back. He slumped forward but stayed in the saddle, galloping out of range. The fire was spreading now, jumping from the Henderson store to the abandoned saloon. Smoke rolled down Main Street, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Through the haze, Eleanor saw a massive man stride into view, Bart Patterson himself. She realized he looked like something out of a nightmare. Huge, bearded, twin guns in his hands and death in his eyes. "Cassidy!" Patterson roared. "I know you're here. Come face me like a man!" Luke emerged from the smoke like a ghost. Blood ran from a cut on his cheek. His coat was torn, but his hands were steady. "Right here, Patterson." They faced each other in the burning street. Two gunfighters out of time. Around them. The shooting slowed, then stopped. Both sides watched, knowing this would decide it. "You killed 3 of my boys," Patterson said. "They had it coming," Luke replied. "Just like you do." Patterson smiled, ugly and cold. "After I kill you, I'm going to burn this town to ash, starting with that pretty banker lady you've been making eyes at." Luke's expression didn't change, but Eleanor saw his jaw tighten. "You'll have to go through me first." "That's the plan." They drew simultaneously, the shots so close they sounded like one. Patterson staggered, a red stain spreading across his shirt. He looked down at it in surprise, then up at Luke, who stood steady with smoking gun. "Damn," Patterson said, and fell face first into the dust. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the remaining outlaws broke, racing for their horses. Luke spun, firing at the fleeing men. Other townspeople joined in, emboldened by their leader's death. 2 more outlaws fell before the rest disappeared into the desert haze. Eleanor emerged from behind the horse trough, her ears ringing from gunfire. The street looked like a battlefield, bodies sprawled in the dust, blood pooling in the dirt, smoke rising from burning buildings. Luke stood in the middle of it all, reloading his guns with mechanical precision. She walked toward him on unsteady legs. He turned at her approach, and she saw something break in his expression. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the blood on her sleeve. "It's nothing." She looked around at the destruction. "We need to stop the fires before they spread further. Eleanor, not now. Luke, help me organize bucket brigades." They worked through the afternoon, townspeople emerging from cover to fight the flames. The Henderson store was lost, along with the old saloon, but they saved the rest. As the sun began to set, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of apocalypse, they gathered the dead, 5 outlaws, including Patterson, on their side. 2 townsmen Eleanor had known since childhood. She stood over their bodies, feeling the weight of their deaths on her shoulders. If she hadn't insisted on fighting, if she'd convinced everyone to flee, "You saved the town," Luke said quietly beside her. "They died defending their homes. There's honor in that." "Is there?" Eleanor's voice was hollow. "Or did they die because I was too stubborn to run?" "Running wouldn't have saved them. The Black Mesa gang would have tracked you down, picked you off one by one. At least this way, it's over." She turned to face him fully then, seeing him clearly for the first time since the battle. Blood had dried on his cheek. His clothes were scorched and torn. But he was alive, solid and real, and standing before her when she'd thought never to see him again. "Why did you really come back?" she asked. Luke holstered his guns, his movements slow and tired. "I told you. I heard about the gang." "No." She stepped closer, close enough to smell gunpowder and smoke on him. "You could have warned us and ridden on. Why stay and fight?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the burning horizon. When he spoke, his voice was raw. 5 years, Eleanor, 5 years of drifting, fighting, trying to forget. But every sunset reminded me of your hair. Every desert wind carried your voice. I tried to stay away, to let you live your life. But when I heard you were in danger..." He turned to her then, and the walls he'd built crumbled. "I came back because leaving was the biggest mistake I ever made. Because that kiss behind the warehouse was the only true thing in a life full of false starts. Because I promised to claim every breath, and I'm tired of breathing alone." Eleanor felt tears cutting channels through the dirt and smoke on her face. Around them, the town worked to clear the damage, to restore order from chaos. But in that moment, there was only the 2 of them, standing in the ruins with truth hanging between them like a bridge. "I'm not the girl you kissed," she said. "I've had to become hard, make terrible choices. I foreclosed on friends, watched families leave because of decisions I made. I'm not sure there's anything soft left in me." Luke raised his hand, gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "And I'm not that gentle stable boy. I've killed men, Eleanor, more than just today. I've done things that wake me up at night, but maybe that's what we need now. Two people forged hard enough to survive in a hard land. She caught his hand, held it against her face. His skin was rough, calloused, real. The town council won't approve. A banker and a gunfighter. Then they'll have to adjust. Luke said, because I'm not leaving again. Not unless you tell me to. Eleanor looked at the devastation around them, at the town that had survived against impossible odds. Then she looked at Luke, scarred and dangerous, and hers if she had the courage to claim him. Stay, she whispered. He kissed her then, there in the smoke and ruin of Main Street, with the dead at their feet and the future uncertain. It tasted of gunpowder and possibilities, of second chances carved from violence and necessity. When they broke apart, the banker's daughter and the drifter had become something new. Survivors, partners, two souls who had traveled long, hard roads to find their way back to each other. The night would bring the accounting of the dead, the tending of wounds, the 1,000 tasks of aftermath. But for this moment, they stood together in the dying light, no longer running from the past or the future or each other. The dried riverbed stretched before them like a scar across the desert floor, all cracked earth and memories of water. Eleanor sat on a flat boulder, her black dress replaced by a simple cotton skirt and blouse. Practical clothes for a practical conversation. Luke crouched nearby, sketching patterns in the dust with a stick, his hat tilted back to catch the evening breeze. 3 days had passed since the battle, 3 days of funerals and rebuilding, of wary glances and whispered conversations. The town was grateful to be alive, but gratitude and acceptance were different creatures entirely. The council met this morning, Eleanor said, breaking the comfortable silence. They're concerned about your continued presence. Luke didn't look up from his dust drawings. I figured as much. Jacob Muller made his feelings pretty clear when I helped him fix his fence yesterday. He's afraid. They all are. You saved them, but you also brought violence to their doorstep. Violence was coming anyway, Luke said quietly. I just helped them meet it standing up instead of lying down. Eleanor picked up a small stone, turned it over in her fingers. This riverbed had run with spring floods when she was a child, before the drought years. Now it was just another broken promise the land had made. Tell me about the years between, she said. Not just the gunfights and the drifting. Tell me who you became. Luke finally looked up, his storm cloud eyes thoughtful. He moved to sit on another rock, close enough that she could have reached out to touch him, far enough that he wasn't presuming. First year was the hardest, he began. I'd head toward a town, see a woman with auburn hair, and my heart would near stop. Took 6 months before I could hear a piano without thinking of you practicing in that stuffy parlor. Eleanor smiled despite herself. I hated that piano. Sold it last year to buy feed for the Hendersons' horses. Good riddance to it, then. Luke's smile was brief but genuine. I worked cattle drives mostly. Honest work, good crews. Learned to read the weather in cloud formations, to doctor sick calves, to play poker well enough to supplement my wages. Made it to the Pacific once. You were right to dream of seeing the ocean. Eleanor, it's like the desert turned to water, endless and changing. Did you ever think of settling down? Finding another town, another woman? Luke shook his head. Tried once, in Oregon. Nice widow lady ran a boarding house. Made it clear I'd be welcome to stay permanent. She was kind, steady, everything a man should want. But when she smiled, all I could see was what was missing. Left after a month. They sat quietly as the sun dropped lower, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals only it could feel. What about after the cattle drive attack? Eleanor prompted. After you killed those men? Luke's expression darkened. That changed things. Once you've killed to survive, you see the world different. Started noticing how many predators walk on 2 legs. Took a job guarding silver shipments out of Nevada. Then Wells Fargo hired me to ride shotgun. Good money, but it meant being ready to kill again if needed. And you were? Ready? Every time. His voice was flat, matter of fact. That's what scared me most, how easy it became. Point, shoot, move on. Started wondering if I was becoming like them, the men I hunted. Eleanor shifted closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. You're nothing like them. How can you be sure? Because you came back to help a town that threw you out. Because you're sitting here worried about the killing instead of boasting about it. Because... She paused, gathering courage. Because the boy I knew is still in there, underneath the scars and gunpowder. Luke met her eyes then, and the vulnerability there took her breath. What if that boy is dead? What if all that's left is the gunfighter? Then I'll mourn him, Eleanor said softly, and learn to love who you've become. The word hung between them. Love? Neither had spoken it aloud before, not 5 years ago in stolen moments, not in the smoke of battle, but here, in this dried riverbed with the ghosts of water and time. It felt right. The council wants me to marry, Eleanor said, changing the subject slightly. They think it would stabilize the bank, provide proper leadership, James Morrison wrote from California, offering to return if I'd accept his proposal. Luke's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice neutral. Morrison's a good man, successful. Could help the town recover. Yes, Eleanor agreed. He's everything sensible, safe, proper. She stood, pacing to the edge of the old riverbed. I've been sensible for 5 years. Luke made every proper choice, every safe decision. And where has it gotten us? A dying town and empty coffers. You've kept them alive, Luke said, standing as well. That's no small thing. Surviving isn't living. She turned to face him, silhouetted against the dying light. I've been thinking about what you said, about breathing alone. I've been doing that too, going through the motions of life without really feeling it, until 3 days ago, when you rode back in and reminded me what it felt like to have my heart race. Luke moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. Eleanor, I can't offer you what Morrison can. I've got some money saved, but not enough to save the bank. I've got skills, but they're the kind that invite trouble, and I've got a past that won't stay buried. I'm not asking you to save the bank, Eleanor said. I'm asking you to help me save myself, to remind me that there's more to life than ledgers and duty. They stood face to face now, the desert wind playing with Eleanor's loosened hair. Luke raised his hand, tucked a strand behind her ear with infinite gentleness. You don't need saving, he said. You're the strongest person I've ever known, but if you want a partner, someone to stand with you against whatever comes next, then I'm yours. Eleanor caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. The town won't understand. They'll think I've gone mad, choosing a gunfighter over respectability. Let them think what they want. We'll prove ourselves through actions, not words. And if more violence comes, if your past catches up, then we'll face it together. I'm done running. Eleanor, from my past, from you, from the chance at something real. She kissed him then, there in the old riverbed with the stars beginning to emerge overhead. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, seasoned by loss and time, carrying the weight of choices made with open eyes. When they pulled apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. So, what happens now? Now? Eleanor smiled, and it transformed her face, revealing the girl that he'd fallen for beneath the woman she'd become. Now we walk back to town, side by side, and let them see that their banker has made her choice. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding, not just the buildings, but the whole town. With your protection skills and my financial knowledge, maybe we can attract new settlers, new businesses. And tonight, you'll stay at the boarding house like a proper gentleman, Eleanor said with mock severity. But tomorrow, after I've scandalized the proper ladies at their sewing circle, perhaps you'll help me move some of Mother's furniture. That big house has too many empty rooms. Luke laughed, a rusty sound that spoke of too little use. Calculating as always, though I notice you're assuming I'll agree to your plan. Won't you? He pulled her close. This woman who'd become steel without losing her fire. I told you, Eleanor, I came back to claim every breath. If you'll have me, I intend to make good on that promise. They walked back toward town as darkness fell, following the ghost river toward lights and life. Behind them, their footprints mingled in the dust, marking the place where two souls had finally stopped running from the truth that time and distance hadn't been able to kill. The banker's daughter knew one secret kiss, but now she knew so much more. The weight of loss, the price of survival, and the rare gift of a second chance. And the drifter, he had returned to claim every breath, only to discover that in giving his heart, he could finally breathe free. The warning came with the Dawn Riders, two exhausted men on half-dead horses, bearing news that sent ice through Eleanor's veins. The Black Mesa gang hadn't been destroyed, only wounded. Bart Patterson's younger brother, Samuel, had gathered the survivors and recruited more men from the border towns. They were coming for revenge, and they were coming hard. Eleanor stood in the bank, Luke beside her, as the messengers delivered their report to the hastily assembled town council. 30 men, maybe more. The first rider gasped, accepting water from Timothy. They hit Culver's Point yesterday, burned it to the ground, said they're coming for the woman banker and the gunfighter who killed Bart. How long? Luke's voice was steady, but Eleanor saw his hand move unconsciously to his gun. 2 days. Maybe 3, if they take their time terrorizing the settlements between here and there. The council erupted in panicked voices. Some wanted to evacuate immediately, others to surrender, still others to fight. Eleanor let them argue for a moment before raising her hand for silence. We need a plan, she said. One that doesn't involve running or surrendering. Mister, Cassidy and I have some ideas. Ideas? Mrs. Henderson's voice was shrill. Your ideas got my store burned and 2 men killed. Now you want us to face 30 outlaws? Would you prefer to face them unprepared? Eleanor countered. They're coming whether we plan or not. Luke spread a rough map on the table. The town's layout works against us in a straight fight. Too spread out, too many approaches. But if we can choose where to make our stand, he pointed to the narrow canyon 3 miles north of town. Skeleton Pass. They'll have to come through there if they're following the main trail. Natural bottleneck, high ground on both sides. An ambush, Jacob Muller said slowly. Could work, if we had the men for it. We don't need many if we're smart about it. Luke continued. Set charges in the right places. Position shooters on the ridges. Make them think we have more fighters than we do. Eleanor studied the map, her mind working through possibilities. We'll need to evacuate the women and children regardless. Send them south to Fort Bidwell with whatever valuables we can load. If we fail at the pass, at least they'll be safe. And if they don't come through the pass? Timothy asked. If they circle around, come from another direction, then we fall back to the secondary plan. Eleanor said, fortify the bank and the church, make our stand there. But I believe Mr. Cassidy is right. They'll take the direct route. Samuel Patterson isn't known for subtlety. The debate continued for another hour, but eventually, necessity won over fear. They had a plan, flawed as it might be. As the council dispersed to begin preparations, Eleanor caught Luke's arm. I need you to teach me, she said quietly. Really teach me, not just point and shoot. If we're making a stand, I need to be more than lucky. They spent the rest of the day in the desert beyond town, Luke drilling her on everything from stance to sight picture. Eleanor's hands were steady, her eye good, but she lacked the instinctive movements that came from years of practice. You're thinking too much, Luke said after she missed 3 shots in a row. Fighting's like dancing. You have to feel the rhythm, not count the steps. I was never much of a dancer either, Eleanor muttered, reloading. I remember differently. His voice softened. That night at the summer dance, watching you move like silk across water, you had rhythm then. That was before I learned that life isn't a dance floor. She raised the rifle again, sighted down the barrel. No, Luke agreed, moving behind her to adjust her position. But the principle's the same. Trust your body, trust your instincts. His hands on her shoulders were warm, steady. Breathe in, hold, squeeze gentle-like. The shot rang true, hitting the target dead center. Eleanor smiled, triumphant, then grew serious again. How many men have you killed, Luke? He was quiet for a long moment. 11, counting the other day. Each one trying to kill me or others first. Doesn't make it easier, knowing that. Does it get easier? The killing? The act itself? Yes. Living with it after? No. He turned her to face him. But protecting what matters, protecting who matters, that makes it bearable. You understand that better than most. I think. You've killed dreams with those foreclosure papers. Watched families break apart. Different weapon, same weight. Eleanor leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I never thought of it that way. We do what we must to survive. Question is whether we can forgive ourselves after. They returned to town as shadows grew long, finding organized chaos. The evacuation was underway, wagons loaded with belongings and fear. Eleanor helped her mother into their carriage, ignoring Martha's tearful pleas to come with them. My place is here, Eleanor said firmly. Father would understand. Your father would want you alive. Martha countered, but there was pride mixed with the fear in her eyes. That young man of yours better keep you safe. We'll keep each other safe, Eleanor promised. The next morning, 28 souls remained in Dusty Creek, every able-bodied man and a handful of women who refused to leave. They worked through the day, hauling supplies to Skeleton Pass, setting charges under Luke's direction, establishing firing positions among the rocks. Eleanor found herself beside Annie Muller, Jacob's daughter, a crack shot who'd learned to hunt alongside her brothers. The younger woman looked scared but determined. Never thought I'd be preparing for war, Annie said, checking her rifle for the 100th time. Neither did I, Eleanor admitted. But sometimes war comes whether we're ready or not. As night fell, they took their positions. Luke commanded one ridge, Eleanor the other, with the best shots distributed between them. The dynamite was set, the fuses ready. Now came the waiting. Eleanor lay prone behind a boulder, rifle ready, watching the approach to the pass. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear desert air. Somewhere in the darkness, death was riding toward them. But for this moment, there was only the quiet breathing of her companions and the vast indifference of the night. You ready for this? Luke's voice came soft from behind her. He'd crossed from his position to check on her. No, she said honestly. But I'll do what needs doing. He crouched beside her, his presence comforting in the darkness. After this is over, if we survive, when we survive, Eleanor corrected. When we survive, he agreed. What then? You planning to keep running the bank? Fighting the desert for every dollar? Eleanor considered the question. I don't know. Part of me wants to see the ocean you described. Part of me can't imagine leaving this place. Difficult as it is. What about you? Can you settle in one place, knowing trouble might follow? I can try, for the right reason. He touched her face gently. For the right person. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The desert's night music, indifferent to human plans and fears. Eleanor caught Luke's hand, held it tight. Whatever comes tomorrow, she said, I'm glad you came back, even if it ends badly. These days have been more real than the last 5 years combined. It won't end badly, Luke said with quiet conviction. We've both traveled too far to lose now. He kissed her forehead, then made his way back to his position. Eleanor settled behind her rifle, watching the darkness, waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. The wind picked up, whistling through the pass like a premonition. Somewhere out there, Samuel Patterson and his gang were coming, carrying death and vengeance. But here in the rocks above Skeleton Pass, the banker's daughter, who'd learned to be a warrior, prepared to meet them. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time until the reckoning. Eleanor breathed deep of the desert air, tasting dust and possibility in equal measure. Soon enough, the shooting would start. But for now, there was only the waiting and the strange peace that comes before battle. The battle at Skeleton Pass erupted with the first light of dawn. Samuel Patterson's gang rode in confident, expecting to sweep through to the sleeping town beyond. Instead, they met coordinated rifle fire from both ridges, men and horses falling in the deadly crossfire. "Now!" Luke shouted, and Jacob Mueller lit the first fuse. The explosion rocked the canyon, bringing down tons of rock to block the retreat. The outlaws were trapped, milling in confusion as bullets rained from above. Eleanor sighted down her rifle, forcing herself to see targets, not men. Her first shot took a rider from his saddle. Her second missed as the man dove for cover. Around her, Annie Muller and the others kept up steady fire, their faces grim with concentration. But Samuel Patterson hadn't survived this long by folding at the first ambush. He rallied his men, organizing return fire that sent rock chips flying around the defenders' heads. Worse, he sent groups scrambling up both sides of the canyon, seeking to flank the ambushers. "They're climbing!" someone yelled. Eleanor turned to see outlaws scaling the rocky slope below their position. She grabbed her revolver, knowing the rifle would be too unwieldy at close range. Beside her, Annie did the same. The first outlaw crested the ridge 20 feet away. Eleanor fired, saw him clutch his shoulder and tumble backward. Another appeared, then another. The ridgetop erupted in close-quarter fighting, desperate and brutal. An outlaw lunged at Eleanor, knife flashing. She twisted aside, felt the blade tear through her sleeve, fired point-blank into his chest. He fell across her rifle, his weight bearing her down. She struggled to push him off, saw another man bearing down on her. Annie's shot took him in the side, spinning him away. "Behind you!" the girl screamed. Eleanor rolled, firing blind. Her bullet caught the attacking outlaw in the leg. Dropping him, she scrambled to her feet, revolver empty, grabbed her rifle to use as a club, across the canyon. She could see Luke's position being overrun. He fought with a pistol in each hand, moving with deadly grace. But there were too many, even as she watched. He took a bullet in the left shoulder, stumbled, kept fighting. "Fall back!" Eleanor shouted. "Secondary positions!" But even as they retreated along the ridge, she knew they were in trouble. Half their fighters were down. The rest scattered. The ambush had bloodied Patterson's gang, but not broken them. The survivors regrouped among a cluster of boulders further along the ridge. Eleanor did a quick count. 12 left from their original 28. Several wounded. Luke made it to their position, blood soaking his shirt, face pale but determined. "How bad?" she asked, helping him sit. "Through and through. I can still shoot." He reloaded his pistols with steady hands. "But we can't hold here. Too exposed." Below, Patterson's men were regrouping too. Eleanor counted at least 15 still mounted, more on foot. They'd paid a heavy price for the passage, but they still outnumbered the defenders. "The town?" Timothy gasped. He was bleeding from a scalp wound, looking dazed. "We'd never make it," Luke said. "They'd ride us down in the open." Eleanor looked around at the exhausted, frightened faces. These people had trusted her, followed her plan, and now they were trapped on a ridge with death closing in. The weight of command pressed on her shoulders like a physical thing. Then she spotted it, a narrow defile between two massive boulders, leading to what looked like a cave mouth. "There," she pointed. "We make our stand there." They moved quickly, carrying the wounded, taking defensive positions around the cave entrance. It was a good spot. The outlaws could only come at them a few at a time, and the overhang provided protection from above. Patterson's gang tried 3 times to rush the position. Each time, coordinated fire drove them back, bodies littering the approach. But ammunition was running low, and Luke was weakening from blood loss despite Eleanor's attempts to bind his wound. As the sun reached its zenith, baking the rocks until they shimmer with heat, Samuel Patterson himself appeared. He was younger than his brother had been, but with the same cruel eyes. "You in the cave!" he called. "This doesn't have to end with all of you dead. Send out Cassidy and the woman banker. The rest can go free. Like hell, Jacob Muller growled. But Eleanor put a hand on his arm. What guarantee do we have? She called back. My word, Patterson replied, which is more than my brother got. Cassidy shot him down like a dog. Your brother was a murdering thief, Luke called out, his voice weaker than Eleanor liked. He got what he deserved. Maybe so, but family is family. Blood demands blood. Eleanor made a decision. She stood, ignoring the protests of her companions, and stepped into view. Patterson's men immediately trained their guns on her, but she stood straight, meeting Samuel's eyes. You want justice for your brother, she said. I understand that, but these people aren't responsible. They're just defending their homes. Let them go, and you can have me. I'm the one who organized the defense. I'm the one who brought Luke Cassidy back here. Eleanor, no! Luke struggled to rise, but fell back, too weak. Patterson studied her. This woman in torn clothes and gun smoke, standing fearless before his guns. You'd trade your life for theirs? If you give your word, they go free. Eleanor, get back here, Annie Muller hissed. But Eleanor didn't move. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You've got sand, lady. I'll give you that. But I want Cassidy too, both of you, or no deal. Before Eleanor could respond, Luke appeared at her shoulder. He swayed on his feet, left arm useless, but his right hand held a cocked pistol steady. You want me, Patterson? Let's settle this proper. You and me, right here, right now. Winner walks away. Losers people accept it. No more killing. Patterson laughed. You can barely stand, Cassidy. I can stand long enough. Eleanor grabbed Luke's good arm. You can't. You've lost too much blood. He looked at her, and in his storm cloud eyes she saw everything. Love, regret, determination. Trust me, he whispered. Then, louder. What say you, Patterson? Or are you too yellow to face a wounded man? The insult hit home. Patterson's face darkened. Clear a space, he ordered his men. What followed was less a gunfight than a ritual. The two men faced each other in the blazing sun. Patterson healthy and confident, Luke pale and swaying. Eleanor's heart hammered as she watched, knowing she was about to lose him just when she'd found him again. Draw when ready, Patterson said. Time slowed. Eleanor saw Luke's slight smile, saw his hand move with that liquid grace that no amount of blood loss could steal. Patterson was fast, incredibly fast. But Luke Cassidy had been born to this moment. 2 shots, so close they sounded as one. Patterson stood frozen, a look of surprise on his face. Then he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Damn, he said, echoing his brother's last word, and fell. Luke's gun dropped from nerveless fingers. He swayed, started to fall. Eleanor caught him, easing him to the ground, cradling his head in her lap. I told you, he whispered, to trust me. The outlaws stood stunned, leaderless. Then, one by one, they began to drift away. The Patterson brothers were dead. The cause for vengeance had died with them. Within minutes, the ridge was empty save for the defenders. We need to get him to town, Eleanor said urgently. He needs a doctor. They fashioned a litter, carried Luke down from the ridge. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. Eleanor walked beside him, holding his hand, whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood. The journey back to Dusty Creek took forever and no time at all. The town's survivors had heard the shooting, feared the worst. When they saw the defenders returning, a cheer went up. They took Luke to Eleanor's house, to the same bed where Harrison Whitfield had died. The irony wasn't lost on her as she and Mrs. Henderson worked to clean and bind his wounds. The bullet needs to come out, Mrs. Henderson said. I've done it before, but it's risky. Do it, Eleanor said without hesitation. The surgery was brutal. Luke thrashed and moaned, delirious with fever. Eleanor held him down, talked to him, reminded him of promises made and a future worth fighting for. Don't you dare leave me, she whispered fiercely. Not now. Not after everything. Night fell. Rain came, unexpected and blessed, breaking the heat and washing the blood from the streets. Eleanor sat beside Luke's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, willing each breath to be followed by another. Annie Muller brought her food she didn't eat, water she barely drank. The whole town waited, knowing that their fate was somehow tied to the man who'd bled for them. As dawn broke, Luke's fever finally broke with it. His eyes opened, focused on Eleanor's face. "Still here?" he whispered. "Always," she replied, and meant it. He smiled weakly. "The rain. Good for the land. Good for everything," Eleanor agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Rest now. We have time." The dawn came gentle over Dusty Creek, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Luke stood on the porch of the Whitfield house, his left arm still bound but healing, watching the sun rise over mountains that no longer seemed like prison walls. The town was stirring to life, hammers ringing as people rebuilt, voices calling morning greetings, children playing in streets that had known too much blood. Eleanor emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd traded her severe black dresses for simple calico, her hair loose around her shoulders. The change made her look younger, closer to the girl he'd kissed behind the warehouse a lifetime ago. "You're up early," she said, handing him a cup. "Old habits." Luke accepted the coffee gratefully. "Besides, I wanted to watch the sunrise. Been too many mornings I wasn't sure I'd see another one." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Dusty Creek wake up. The rain 3 weeks ago had been the first of many. The drought had broken at last, bringing life back to the parched land. Green shoots pushed through the red earth, and the old riverbed showed signs of water returning. "Jacob Muller stopped by yesterday," Eleanor said. "The town council wants to offer you the sheriff's position." Luke nearly choked on his coffee. "Sheriff? Me? Who else? You've proven yourself 10 times over. The town needs law, especially now that word's getting out about the silver strike in the northern hills." It was true. A prospector had stumbled into town last week, half dead from thirst but carrying ore samples that assayed rich. Already, new faces were appearing on Main Street, drawn by the promise of wealth. "I'm no lawman. Eleanor, I've spent more time on the wrong side of wanted posters than the right. Maybe that's exactly why you'd be good at it." She turned to face him fully. "You know how outlaws think, how they operate, and more importantly, people respect you. They've seen you bleed for this town." Luke set down his cup, ran his hand through his hair. "What about us? A sheriff needs to be above reproach. You're still the banker, still responsible for the town's financial future. People might talk if people already talk." Eleanor interrupted with a smile. "Haven't you heard? The banker's daughter has taken up with a notorious gunfighter. Scandalous." "Eleanor," she stopped his words with a kiss. There on the porch where anyone could see, when they parted, her eyes were bright with mischief and something deeper. "I'm done living for what people might say," she said. "We've earned the right to make our own choices." Luke pulled her close, marveling at this woman who'd found strength in loss and fire in hardship. "If I take the job, I'll need a deputy, someone who can shoot straight and knows the town. Annie Muller would be perfect. She's proven herself. And it's time Dusty Creek moved past the notion that only men can keep the peace." "A female deputy?" Luke grinned. "Now who's being scandalous?" They were interrupted by Timothy Hawkins hurrying up the walk, excitement plain on his face. "Miss Eleanor, Mr. Cassidy, you need to see this." They followed him to the bank, where a crowd had gathered. A large freight wagon sat outside, accompanied by armed guards. The side of the wagon bore the seal of the territorial government. "What's all this?" Eleanor asked. A well-dressed man stepped forward, producing official papers. "Miss Whitfield, I'm James Thornton from the Territorial Treasury. We've received word of your town's heroic defense against the Patterson gang. The bounties on Bart and Samuel Patterson, plus various members of their gang, come to..." He consulted his papers. $15,000 to be paid to the town of Dusty Creek. Eleanor felt her knees go weak. $15,000, enough to shore up the bank, provide loans for new businesses, rebuild properly, enough to give Dusty Creek a real chance at survival. Furthermore, Thornton continued, the territory is establishing a new circuit court in this region, and we'd like Dusty Creek to be the county seat. It would mean regular government salaries, increased trade, and official recognition. The crowd erupted in cheers. Eleanor found herself crying, months of strain and fear finally releasing. Luke's arm came around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. Looks like you won't be leaving for the ocean anytime soon. He murmured in her ear, the ocean can wait. She replied, we have a town to build. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. New buildings rose from empty lots. Families began arriving, drawn by silver and stability in equal measure. Luke accepted the sheriff's position and promptly deputized Annie Muller, causing exactly the stir Eleanor had predicted. But when Annie broke up a saloon brawl her second day on the job, disarming 3 minors without firing a shot, the protests quieted. Eleanor used the bounty money to establish a town development fund, offering low-interest loans to new businesses. A newspaper started up, then a school. The abandoned lots filled with life and purpose. Through it all, she and Luke built something together, not just a relationship, but a partnership. He brought law to the growing town. She provided the financial framework for prosperity. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, planning and dreaming and occasionally arguing about the best path forward. We make a good team, Luke said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the desert in familiar shades of gold and crimson. We do, Eleanor agreed. Then, with a sideways glance, good enough to make it official? Luke nearly fell off his chair. Eleanor Whitfield, are you proposing to me? Well, you seem to be taking your time about it, she said primly. A woman can't wait forever, you know. He laughed, pulling her into his lap despite her mock protests. I was trying to be proper, court you like a gentleman. Luke Cassidy, she said, framing his face with her hands. We passed proper the night you kissed me behind the warehouse. I don't want a gentleman's courtship. I want a partner's promise. He kissed her then, long and deep, tasting of coffee and forever. When they broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said simply. Be my wife, my partner, my everything. Let me claim every breath like I promised, and give you every one of mine in return. Yes, she whispered, and sealed it with another kiss. They married on a crisp autumn morning, with the whole town in attendance. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Luke wore his sheriff's badge and a new suit that Annie Muller had bullied him into buying. Jacob Muller gave Eleanor away, grumbling about propriety even as tears stood in his eyes. As they exchanged vows in the little church, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them here. The frightened girl who'd dreamed of escape had become a woman who'd found her strength in staying. The gentle stable boy had been forged into a protector, scarred but not broken. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister said, beaming. You may kiss your bride. Luke swept her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly while the congregation cheered. When they finally parted, he whispered in her ear, every breath, Eleanor, every single one. They walked out of the church into brilliant sunshine. Main Street stretched before them, busy with life and commerce. Children played in the dust. Merchants hawked their wares. And somewhere, a piano played a jaunty tune. Dusty Creek had survived its trial by fire and emerged stronger. At the edge of town, the desert stretched endlessly, beautiful in its harsh majesty. The mountains stood purple against the horizon, no longer barriers but guardians, and through it all, the wind blew constant and free, carrying the scent of sage and rain and possibility. Eleanor looked up at her husband, scarred, dangerous, and absolutely hers. He smiled down at her, those storm cloud eyes soft with love and promise. No regrets? He asked. Not one. She replied, and meant it. They walked hand in hand down Main Street, the banker and the sheriff, the dreamer and the drifter who'd found their way home. Behind them, the church bells rang out across the desert, a song of celebration and hope. The banker's daughter had known one secret kiss, but that had been only the beginning. Now she knew the weight of duty and the strength found in standing firm. She knew the price of survival and the value of second chances. Most of all, she knew that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, made daily, to face whatever came with another's hand in yours. And the drifter, he had returned to claim every breath, and found his life's purpose in the claiming. Home wasn't a place, but a person, and he'd traveled all the hard miles to find his way to her. As the sun climbed toward noon, painting their shadows long across the dusty street, Eleanor and Luke Cassidy walked into their future together, no longer running from the past or afraid of tomorrow. They had earned their happiness with blood and tears and unwavering courage. And in the vast, unforgiving beauty of the American West, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed the tale of Eleanor and Luke's journey through hardship to happiness, please let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Did the ending satisfy you? We can't wait to hear from you.